Welcome everyone to the forum that is focused on the 5th Legislative District. We know the need for quality, affordable housing is greater than ever in East King County, and we believe it is important for the 5th Legislative District voters to hear from their state representative candidates in their own words, how they will fight for an affordable, vibrant region. All candidates have been invited to this forum to participate. The forum will be 1 hour, and I will be moderating. I am Patience Malaba. I have the pleasure and honor of serving at the helm of the Housing Development Consortium. And in the moderation, I will be covering a range of questions from housing and a little bit broader. This town hall is hosted by the Circle Community Navigation in partnership with the Eastside Housing Equity Coalition. The Eastside Housing Equity Coalition includes organizations whose logos you see below, and that is the Indian American Community Services Organization. We also have the Muslim Community Network Association, the Eastside for All, as well as ourselves at the Housing Development Consortium. The Eastside Housing Equity Coalition works together to advocate for housing policies that address racial disparities and inequities with the goal of making affordable housing real in our communities and making it accessible for everyone. And with that, I will just tee up and say we all know that housing is a human right and the foundation for a community to thrive. Yet residents in our communities are struggling with unprecedented challenges in finding and keeping a home that they can afford. Rising rents continue to displace people further from their communities and push our most vulnerable neighbors further into homelessness. We also know that Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities are disproportionately impacted by this challenge. They are further cost burdened and experiencing homelessness in higher numbers. Simply put, we need more affordable housing. We need public investments that can scale the production of housing. We need policies that can stabilize renters, and we also need to expand the supply of affordable homes across the state. And with that said, I'm going to thank all of you for joining us here today and pivot over to the structure of our conversation. The candidates will be asked 6 questions, but prior to the 6 questions, we'll start with just an introduction. We will have a timer that they will be watching out for, but we're looking forward to this being a riveting discussion across the board. And with that, I am going to ask the candidates to introduce themselves, just your name and your relationship. And I believe we're starting off with Christiana.
Hello, yes, and thank you also for this opportunity. Good afternoon. My name is Christiana De Leon, she, her pronouns, and I am calling in to you today from Black Diamond, Washington, where I'm serving as a 2-term council member for the city of Black Diamond. A lot of my work, especially to make sure that we were really interrupting harmful narratives and replacing them with conversations and policies that are more aligned with the concept that housing is a human right, is something that made me incredibly proud to be part of this work. In terms of the relationship with Issaquah, obviously we share the same 5th legislative district, and also at the same time, I've had to also go a lot into places such as Issaquah just to make sure that we are also creating those partnerships and creating more coalitions along the way, especially when it does come to making sure that we're continuing to spread that narrative of what it looks like for all of our communities to be heard and valued, especially when it comes to issues related to transportation and housing. The only other thing I think I'll mention at this point too is I'm a former public school teacher. I worked especially as a teacher in English language learners or for ELL students. And that was especially important for me to bring up only because I've really seen firsthand what it means to be serving our community in a way that reflects that the housing crisis is very real, and for people to come to this community and suddenly find themselves outpriced out of a home is absolutely unacceptable. To say nothing of the fact that we are completely under-resourced out here. We don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the funds, we don't have the revenue to really make the kind of changes that we need to. All of which is why I'm really happy to be running for this position. But I know we'll have a lot of time to cover more ground, and that was probably a longer introduction, but I am really grateful for this opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Christiana. And then we'll go to Victoria.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victoria Hunt. I'm a third-term Issaquah City Council member, and I have served in this role for the last 6 years, really gotten to enjoy working with several of the groups that are hosting this meeting today, including Eastside for All and The Circle. I also am a mom of public school kids in the elementary school in the dual language program in the Issaquah School District. So that is another connection to Issaquah that is really important to me. And I chose Issaquah as the place to raise my family. And then before I served on council, I was working as affiliate faculty in the Urban Design and Planning Department of University of Washington. And I was learning about how to make sure that we have walkable neighborhoods, vibrant neighborhoods. And I wanted to bring that experience to my community. And that was my reason initially for serving on the Issaquah City Council, and continues to be a huge priority of mine. I look forward to all of the thoughtful questions that we will be discussing about policies this
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. I want to make sure before we move on that Jason has not yet joined us. So I'm just going to do a quick check. Okay. So we don't have Jason. We'll move on to question 1. And this is our opening question. You both know we are facing a regional crisis with implications for housing affordability, access, and equity. If elected, what policies and actions will we prioritize to protect renter households, to prevent and end homelessness, and to ensure that more people have access to safe, healthy, and affordable homes? And this time, let's start with you, Victoria.
So the regional housing crisis really does impact people all across the district. It's one of the things that folks tell me about when I go to their door to let them know about this upcoming election that we're going to have to choose the next representative for the 5th Legislative District. It's really something that impacts people's lives in all aspects. People tell me about how they have to travel further to go to work, and that impacts the amount of time they can spend with their family. That also impacts their economic mobility. And so while I'm a scientist and actually a data scientist, I love having data to inform decisions, but I also am very moved by these anecdotes, these stories, these individual experiences that people have had in our community dealing with this housing crisis. So some of the policies that I support, we are going to be talking about in more detail over the course of the evening, but I support density, especially in areas that are walkable. I think we need more transit-oriented development so that folks can also access transit as a way to get around. This also helps with protecting our environment and with achieving our climate goals, which is very, very important to the community. And I also support zoning reform to make sure that we're allowing for the kinds of housing that our community needs. Missing middle housing so that seniors can downsize in their communities, for example. The bottom line is I will absolutely prioritize this if I am able to serve in the legislature, because it's one of the #1 things that impacts people's lives in the district.
Thank you. We'll move over to Christiana.
Thank you. Yes. And that's actually a lot of what also attracted me into this work as well. I'm serving in one of the fastest growing communities in the region, if not still the county of Black Diamond. In a lot of ways, these kinds of policies are created about us, but without us in mind. And I mean that in the case of when we talk about priorities and concerns related to transit-oriented development, for example, that was something I've actually gone to Olympia to help testify on and lobby on, was the really critical piece that we do not have transit out here, despite being in the urban growth boundaries. So when I talk about how we can do a yes and with these solutions, it's about how we actually bring more voices and perspectives to the table. What that should look like is obviously training and investing more in transit employees to make sure that we are really being able to create more transit. Also, we should have a transit-oriented development that has an affordable housing component to it. The other part that I would say on missing middle housing is that was something that I, and solely I, supported on my council because I recognize that this was a need in our community yesterday. The thing I want to add constructively on missing middle housing that's lacking is that last session, like a lot of disappointing bills that either failed to pass or were passed with huge compromises, where marginalized and historically marginalized communities were sacrificed on the altar of progress, is that we do not have much capacity to build out with missing middle housing. By that, I mean that we have struck this kind of a compromise, so-called, where we actually are not able to build enough missing middle housing. And that's due to the fact that HOAs and other kinds of addendums have really hamstrung our ability in the city to find more places to build. For folks who don't know as much, Black Diamond is largely growing in the way it is because of our master plan development agreement that is largely in an HOA agreement. The other thing I'll add to that is on rent stabilization. I was really dismayed that that failed last session. I was also testifying in favor of that. And I think a 7% increase annually is the least we can do. That's some of the many things that I'm hoping to accomplish.
Well, that pivots us to the next question here. Thank you. So we want to spend time on the renter protections. House Bill 2114 was proposed last year. It did advance out of the House, but we struggled with getting support. But what it provided for was residential renters and manufactured homeowners with protections against excessive rent increases. Specifically, the bill as advanced had a 7% cap on annual rent increases. And the big question in 2025 is, if elected, will you support a 5% annual rent cap increase as the bill was introduced, which breaks down to $87 per month, if that's an increase that's being provided, and then the other alternative being the 7% annual rent cap increase as the bill passed out of the House, and that's $122 per month increase. Or do you prefer a no cap? And the question is, of any of your selections, why and why not? And let's flip it around this time and start with Christiana.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess that was a great segue. So I would absolutely say that the 5% annual rent cap increase would be, I think, some of the least things that we could do here. And I say that also leaning in on personal experience, and where I'm also wanting to make sure that I'm communicating that with other policymakers in my city and other stakeholders. I say in a lot of ways that, you know, rent stabilization is actually a form, it's like a mortgage, or better yet, a mortgage is really rent stabilization. And that's the kind of message that I want to make sure is that when we're talking about housing equity, we're talking about all people. In my community of Black Diamond, and I'm really dismayed about this, we have new apartments that have been built, but there are already people now accessing the food banks, which have also had their funding cut as a result. And we are, as a city, unequipped to fully deal with the gravity of that kind of a situation and crisis. So as far as I'm concerned, I want to make sure that passes the threshold. And I just want to make sure that we are all hands on deck when it comes to really creating an actual equitable housing policy.
Thank you. And it looks like Jason has joined us. I will give it some time for him to come up to speed, but let's go over to Victoria in responding to this question.
Okay, thank you. I was council president in 2020 and 2021 for the city of Issaquah. These were extremely difficult years for the community because of the economic impacts of COVID-19. And then after the moratorium on evictions was lifted, there were very large rent increases, and many community members were very sadly displaced from our community. And so that experience and those community members coming to me as council president at the time really made a deep impression on me. I am supportive of the 5% annual rent cap increase. I would also be supportive of the 7% annual rent cap increase. Both of these numbers are a lot lower than the rent increases that members of my community are experiencing. And so I think either one would be a step in the right direction. I don't support the no cap. I support rent stabilization because of the experiences I've had leading my community on this issue.
Thank you. Well, with that, Jason, we want to give a couple of seconds to catch you up if you are on here now. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
I apologize for being late. I came home late from work and some traffic. My apologies. I'm here and I've read the question.
Understandable. I will just use my privilege as chair to allow you to introduce yourself, your name and your connection to ISSIQA, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Oh, sure. So I'm Jason Ritchie, one of the candidates for the 5th Legislative District, Position 1. I am a renter. I have lived in the Sammamish-Klahanie Plateau area for a number of years, a little intermittent break in California during COVID for some work. And I am very interested in figuring out, I served on the San Diego City Council, focusing on creating more accessible transit-oriented housing. For me, it's a huge focus on what we're trying to do at the state legislative level is create more affordable housing, more units. We have, millions of units to create in a very limited period of time. We need to get some housing built. We need to figure out how to do it in an environmentally conscious way, in a way that doesn't add traffic, but that we build, what I've been saying to folks on the doors is building up, not out. But that's been my focus. I'm a father, been married for 27 years, father of 2 sons, and welcome the opportunity to answer some questions. So I do have an answer for question 2, if that'll help. I want to jump in. I don't want to take everyone's time, but I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Yes, let's have you respond to question 2 here about the cap options.
Yeah, so it is, I've kind of had an evolution of thought on this over time. And while I initially start off with absolutely as a renter, my rent's gone up. I've seen it happen. I've lived it personally. I am learning that there are some unintended consequences with having a government mandated cap applicable to everyone. What I would say is that I would prefer, my preference would be if there was either, I'm going to propose an option D if I can, if I can go that way, and that would be a voucher program for folks that have demonstrated financial difficulties, that they would receive a voucher from the state that would essentially give them an opportunity to be able to rent at a more affordable rate. And those that did that, they could still be housed. We want to make sure people can afford their housing, that we don't have people that are essentially, we're not adding to the homeless population. Some of the issues that I'm seeing here are if we do impose rent caps or rent stabilization across the board, across the state, from a state legislative level, just from looking at some of the numbers, it seems like that's going to cause people to...
Thank you, Jason.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I will have you note that we do have a timer.
Oh, okay.
And we're giving 60 seconds per
Okay.
candidate. It is a box that's somewhere at the top. Please watch for that.
Oh, okay.
We'll move on to the next question that continues on the renter protections conversations. And we know that at the state level, when bills that are related to tenants protections move forward, we've seen some opposition that rises up. But the state has enacted the just cause termination, as well as the right to counsel for low-income tenants in the eviction court. There's been some opposition to those bills, as I mentioned, and the question for the 3 of you is, will you continue to support these tenant protections? Are there any other tenants protections that you support? And this time around, I think we're starting back with Victoria, and then we'll do Christiana and go to Jason.
Great, thank you. So I would absolutely continue to support these tenant protections. And I think that they are a step in the right direction. I still think there's a large imbalance between tenants and landlords, which especially the right to counsel and supporting that is really important. And as a Issaquah City Council member, we, especially after the eviction moratorium ended in 2021, we put forward city funding to make sure that residents had access to the right to counsel because of the importance of that. Additionally, as a Issaquah City Council member, I have supported the full suite of recommendations from ARCH, a regional coalition of housing, which includes things in addition to giving rent increases, which was passed by my council, also caps on things like move-in fees and late fees.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's go to Christiana.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I would also be absolutely in support of these protections. Again, to my dismay, I've been to Olympia a lot during my tenure on the council because that's where I wanted to make sure that our voices for our community was heard, especially on these kinds of issues and with our kind of semi-unique challenges to this. So what I can say, even for my 10 times on the Hill alone, is I've been really frustrated to know that the dynamic is that we're, as a legislative body, that we're more concerned about short-term electoral wins and making this kind of substantive change. That's the language that I've been hearing, and we need to put an end to that, right? So yes, we need to do that. I will say that with our city, we also made sure to, because we couldn't do a full-fledged support for all rent stabilization, that we were at least able to help with our ARPA funds to create more possibilities through the community center to pay for utility fees. That's some of it. I think that's the yes and in addition to the above. Also, again, as a former ELL teacher, I also understand the importance of multicultural communication and disseminating this information. So partnering with organizations, including with interpreters, but also people who can interlocute on cultural dynamics with this to be able to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks like I saw when I was teaching.
Excellent. Thank you. Jason, over to you.
There we go. So agreed with my fellow candidates. I absolutely continue to support the protections. I do think the issue that Councilmember De Leon brought up about just overall, there's more going into this than just renter protections. Just isn't your rent. It's your utilities, being able to have the lights on. So there's a lot of other things that the state can do to try to protect tenants when there are issues like that. So I certainly would support anything we can do to help our tenants that are in low-income situations, to help them avoid eviction court, to find out-of-court issues or settlements, but absolutely have that right to counsel so they know what they can do, what their options are before any kind of eviction proceedings begin to spiral out of control.
Excellent. Thank you. With that, we will move on to the next question. And this question has quite a bit of pieces into it, and we're giving you more time in responding to the question. So you have 90 seconds in response. But for the first time ever, cities are required to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population. This is language that is in the GMA. It is the GMA goal, and we changed that with House Bill 1220. So that planning for housing does include emergency housing. It includes shelters and permanent supportive housing. Despite the requirements, we all know that jurisdictions do continue in some cases to place restrictions on the siting of this housing. And just this past session, lawmakers proposed the Housing Accountability Act. So that was House Bill 2113, which would create a builder's remedy for affordable housing. And what this does is it ensures that there's accountability for jurisdictions to absolutely do all they can to cite housing production while they are meeting these requirements and get us to a point where we can see the production of homes online. So it would prohibit a city or a county from denying an affordable housing development unless they have a housing element that is in compliance with the GMA housing goals. California has this policy. They've had it since 1990, and we are working on replicating some of their success. The question for you, and I heard earlier your support for zoning changes, which is a great starting place, but would you support implementing a builder's remedy in Washington? Are there other accountability measures for cities that you support? And this time we'll start with Jason.
There we go. Yes, so have some very up close and personal, all three of us are either current or former city council members, so I'll speak to my experience with this, try to keep it brief with 90 seconds, but this does, I'm happy to see that the bills are out there and we can try to do something. We do need a builder's remedy. So what I saw and the issues that I saw were that there are too many holes and opportunities at the state legislative level, the RCW level, that allow city councils that are more geared towards that NIMBY perspective to not do anything, to find a way out of it, to not have any options for people, and to really limit their housing to a certain economic strata. That caused myself and one other council member on the council in Sammamish to really fight back, and it was a huge tumultuous fight, and we really didn't have that thing we could go to at the state level other than to go to the governor's office and look at the GMA and say there's it's unambiguous. So court cases and the sanctions of the governor, just a big mess in Sammamish as a result of this kind of issue. And it does, to me, the builder's remedy speaks to, it has to be in a development agreement or in a, some sort of document that we know what we're getting and that there are actually plans as we're reviewing plans at the city council level, reviewing what they're gonna do and what it's gonna look like and how many are there gonna be. And when we say affordable, what are we talking about? And all different kinds of strata, and to build the actual zoning is one thing, but to actually build it out and working with those private builders, those companies, the development companies, to actually have them tell us on the blueprints what these things are going to look like and have it included, not just, oh, this one's going to be, we're just going to knock this one down. It has to, a lower cost here. We need to actually have it be part and parcel of the whole thing, the entire development, so that it is part of an overall feeling of, it creates a homogenous feeling of everybody having that opportunity. So I certainly support the builder's remedy. I think that's essential, and I think that having it come from Olympia is going to make a big difference at the city council level.
Thank you, Jason. And let's move on to Christiana.
Thank you. Yeah, and also I am in support of implementing a builder's remedy. I have a little bit of nuance to it, not because I'm opposed to it, but because I want this to be set up for success in communities like mine, where I know that the word on the street and how people construe these kinds of bills has a lot of, like, I think to, former council member Ritchie's point about a lot of NIMBYist dog whistles. And so for me, it's really important that we interlocute with these communities. And I know how to work in communities that are often underrepresented in these conversations and who are concerned about what it looks like for what would it look like to pass a builder's remedy. In a lot of cases, it has to do with the fact that communities like mine are just plain under-resourced. We don't have the revenue. We don't have the economic and political capital to make these things move on their own. So for me, it's about how do we make sure that the Growth Management Act is no longer an unfunded mandate? Because despite that we've had some incremental support from organizations like the Department of Commerce, it's really too little too late. And that's where I want to make sure that if we're building more affordable and accessible housing units, that we're doing it in such a way that really makes sure that people can actually stay housed in the community and also get the additional resources they need. That's also where I'm really passionate about making sure that we close that the loophole in cities like mine that also are a food desert, a healthcare desert, and also a transit desert. So making sure that we have a holistic understanding of the additional services that are needed beyond housing. Also, our schools are completely overcrowded. We need to make sure that these communities aren't just ones where you can live, but that they're livable as well. So it's a yes and, as always.
Thank you. Let's move on to Victoria.
Well, in Issaquah, we got right to it and made sure that our code was compliant with this HB 1220. I'm the chair of our Planning, Development, and Environment Committee in Issaquah, which reviewed the code to make sure that we were planning for and accommodating these kinds of housing, including emergency shelters. And this is really important that cities do that. I am supportive of a builder's remedy for that reason. the Department of Commerce estimates that we need 1 million housing units in the not too distant future. So there's absolutely a need, and it's across all of these different types of housing that we really do need this to be built. That said, I also would like to recognize that there are many cities and many communities that are welcoming. They have put in place these accommodating these kinds of housing, emergency shelters, for example, but it is not necessarily being built. And so I would also want to make sure that we're supporting cities that have taken steps to welcome this housing so that they are also able to actually see the benefits for their community members of having this housing actually get built. So if you think about policies as sort of carrots and sticks, the builder's remedy is more of the stick. And so with that, I would want to make sure that we do have incentives and that we do have supportive funding, for example, from the Housing Trust Fund, to make sure that our communities are able to actually have these housing be developed once they are possible to be developed.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's stay on question 4. I have a couple of follow-up questions. Just to zero in a little bit on the numbers. So we need 1 million more homes across Washington state over the next 2 decades. And of that million, about 500,000 of those have to be affordable for folks in the lowest income rank. And the question I want to bring to all of you as candidates is, how will you support permanent supportive housing production in the 5th legislative district? And let's start with Christiana, and then go to Victoria, and then go to Jason.
Thank you. And could you also repeat some of the follow-up questions to that?
The follow-up question is on the reality that as a state, we need 1 million more homes over the next 2 decades. And of the 1 million homes, about half of those must be affordable to folks at the lowest income level. So when we think about the affordable housing, the housing requirements statewide, a significant number of those have to be affordable to people with lower incomes. And my question to you is for you to talk about some of the ways that you will support the siting of permanent supportive housing in the 5th legislative district as a state representative if elected.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to make sure I was addressing and encapsulating the context of your question. So absolutely. So in places like Black Diamond, when I first took office, we were a city of just under 5,000. In a few years, we're also slated with the end of our growth management, or with the end of our master plan development agreement, that we could be essentially quadrupling or quintupling in a handful of years. And so we are absolutely taking in the growth, but is it all going to be growth that's actually truly affordable? I would say no. And that's because in a lot of ways, again, we were hamstrung on House Bill 1110 as a compromise that essentially took us out of the picture. So we'll build more houses, but they're not affordable. People are moving from places like Seattle and Issaquah, hoping that it's more affordable for them. And that's where we are really finding ourselves in a bind, where there are a lot of long-term residents who are now being outpriced of their homes. And I got our assessed value of our home in the mail today. I would not be able to afford it. And it's only, only quote unquote, $500,000. I'm seeing homes being sold for only $945,000 that are absolutely not worth $945,000. So for me, this is again how we make sure that we are actually listening to communities like mine and making sure that we are fully addressing the needs that have been long ignored when we talk about communities that really are already stepping up to the plate, but aren't. The last thing I will say is on AMI, we need to retool AMI because we're also in the media market with places like Sammamish and some of the most expensive zip codes. That also means that we need to say, if more people are working multiple jobs to stay afloat, that we need to say your primary source of income, not multiple, because I think that's also what's hiding this true scope of this crisis.
Thank you. Let's go over to Victoria.
Well, so permanent supportive housing in particular, one of the things that I think the state could help support more on is to make sure that we have the folks that are trained to provide the services that are in supportive housing. So this is a workforce training opportunity that I think we definitely need to make sure that we have that workforce to help address this concern, which is a real concern. I will say in Issaquah for a long time, we had inclusionary zoning, which meant that when you built in the Regional Growth Center of Issaquah, you would have to include affordable units. However, we were finding that developers would often just build outside of that Regional Growth Center. And so what we have done in response is adopt a pilot program of a multifamily tax exemption. So this is a tax incentive so that those buildings will get built, and so that we will have those affordable units at the levels that we need them within our Regional Growth Center, which is also much more walkable and transit oriented, and will provide that additional benefit to those residents. So I do think that the state has a role in making sure that our communities are able to do things like that, to provide the incentives, to make sure that we are working with developers to have the kind of markets where this kind of building is supported. And additionally, we have found huge success with a co-response program to make sure that folks are able to know where the services are that they can access.
Thank you, Victoria. And let's move on to Jason.
Go mute. Okay, hey, thank you. So I agree with both of my fellow candidates in a lot of ways. I'm gonna just touch on the idea that this is certainly the fifth LDs are kind of it's an amalgamation of a lot of different pieces that they don't fit together real well, like every district, right? I mean, you have this Issaquah-Sammamish area, which is pretty transit oriented. It's got quite a bit of expensive housing, and then you have these large gaps of essentially rural land down towards Maple Valley, and then a little bit more down to Black Diamond, a little bit more down to Enumclaw. And then you have Renton Highlands, which kind of connects to Renton. It's a little bit more transit oriented. It's these weird little islands or pockets of different situations happening. So I think from a holistic approach, I go to the idea of transit-oriented development as a key function of what it means to be supportive housing. We need affordable housing so that people can actually be able to live there, thrive there. Councilmember Hunt just mentioned about helping people be able to be successful in their roles and being able to have careers. I mean, that's a huge part of this. Being on or near a light rail or a bus route, being able to get back and forth to work, being able to afford where they go to work, having reasonable distance to a quality school, be close to a grocery store. All these things play into supportive housing, and it does take a larger, more holistic state level view, and I support creating that larger holistic view across not just the fifth, but the whole state.
Great, thank you. I have just one more question and then we'll move on. The three of you have a unique background in that you have been in local office. And at one point, each of you has mentioned the NIMBYism that you see locally. And just a quick response to how you will play a role in combating that NIMBYism as an elected official at the state level. How will you organize the community locally to bring in support for the legislation you'll be putting forward? And let's start with Jason this time.
Sure. I think we all three come from different city councils with different situations, right? Different majorities, different interests, different people, different pressures from the community. Taking from my experience, not everything is going to be a home run. I mean, I'm trying to poke some base hits here, right? I'm trying to get a couple things happening, start moving things forward, because I think nothing breeds success like success. You have to plug in some ideas, see that they're successful, and then that breeds people's success or desire to see it happen again, and it downplays people's fears. Getting that first level of supportive housing, getting that first level of affordable housing, getting that plugged in and helping people be successful, and then they're off on their own, and it isn't what the NIMBYs thought it would be, right? They don't even, their fears are allayed, and then you can move on to the next phase, and it grows from there. So to me, it's really trying to get something started, moving it forward, and showing that we can be successful at this, and then shutting those NIMBY folks down.
Okay, let's move on to Christiana.
Thank you. So I first took office 5 years ago in 2019, having unseated actually a far right, actually a statewide militia leader who was actually appointed in because of why Black Diamond was in the news with the recall, right? Because it was essentially a story of extreme NIMBYism to the point that it literally shut down the city. And with that, I took office having unseated the appointed incumbent. And it was kind of like there was an assumption that I was part of this pariah and I was part of that movement, and I wasn't. So I will say that, at least from my personal experience, that I've had to really make sure that I am, holding fast to those values, while also learning how to speak and communicate and dialogue with people who are from very different spectrums in the community in terms of persuasion. That's why when I'm at the door, some of my best conversations are with people who wouldn't necessarily vote for somebody like me, but I find where we have that in common, especially when it comes to the lived values of making sure that if you want to age in place, that you can. There are ways to do this, and that's how I've kind of survived and helped thrive with other council members in this city. I was a bellwether for it, and I just know that if we're really going to get serious about housing equity, we have to make sure that we're absolutely engaging these people on some very real founded fears about what they want to see about their community. I can do that work.
Thank you, Christiana. Let's go on to Victoria.
Well, all of you on this call are advocates for our much needed housing, much needed affordable housing. And I think, my approach has been that there are champions in our community that want this housing. And I believe strongly in the ability of our community members who are welcoming and who want this housing to talk with their neighbors, to get out there and talk with their community members, and to explain the benefits, that you can have multiple generations living in the same region together, and you can have the grandparents can participate in the grandchildren's lives as also childcare benefit. And, there's just so many reasons why it is really important. So I think that my time on the city council, also I have the endorsements of 5 of the in-district mayors within the district. So those relationships with community members and with elected leaders across the region, I would just want to make sure that we're explaining the benefits of this housing. And I think it's not a hard sell, as evidenced by all of you spending your Thursday or your Tuesday night with us.
Thank you, Victoria. With that, we'll move on to the next question. And here we're drilling down on funding, and you will get 90 seconds to respond to the question. But we all know that the market on its own does not create low-income affordable housing. There is a well-known scarcity of local funding to support affordable housing at the scale of the community need. In fact, there are some jurisdictions, because they don't have local resources, that fall far short behind because they don't have the ability to make their projects a little bit more competitive. And the question to you is, as lawmakers recognized prior, they introduced bills in 2024. They introduced a similar bill in 2023. Those bills have not been successful. One of the bills that we led on and advocated on was House Bill 2276, which would adjust the Tier 1 threshold of the real estate excise tax. So that's the Affordable Homes Act. It would then impose a new real estate transfer tax of 1% on sales greater than 3 million. The future revenue would then be targeted towards critical housing programs, including being a fund source for the Housing Trust Fund, the April Health Homes investments, the stabilization of housing providers, as well as investing in the IDD population. The question for you is, what are your specific commitments to creating a sustainable funding source for the Housing Trust Fund and creating new funding tools at the state level? And there's a number of ideas on this, so we want to hear all of your excellent policy ideas that you bring at the state level. And let's start with Victoria, and then we'll go to Jason and then Christiana. So Victoria, over to you.
The premise of the question is absolutely spot on. The market does not on its own create low-income affordable housing. I've certainly seen that. I think there are several things that we need to support, and absolutely funding, which in the case of our state is largely through the Washington State Housing Trust Fund. Funding is definitely one of them. And I do support this real estate excise tax and these sorts of relatively progressive taxes to make sure that we do have the funds within the Housing Trust Fund to make some of this housing available for our communities. I think we also need to foster an environment of developers who knows what can be built and who has that assuredness that the rules aren't going to change. So I think zoning and working through making sure that the zoning and reform of our permitting regulations, et cetera, is conducive to developers. That's another thing that I think we absolutely need to do to make the market actually be able to produce this housing. And additionally, I think we need to work with our local elected officials to ensure that they understand the benefits of this and that they can communicate it back to their community members.
Great, thank you. And we're moving on to Jason.
So I'm coming at this from a couple different perspectives, but I'll speak just generally. Obviously, I without hesitation, support making sure the wealthy pay their fair share. Let's put it that way. There is a significant change in the value of property in Washington State, real property, in the past 10, 15 years. Significant, past 3-4 years. It just keeps going up. So as the REIT becomes something we can look at, there is money available that we can use for our state housing trust fund. So I am certainly supportive of the tiered program here and making sure that we can keep our housing trust fund fully funded. But actually, this is where I'm at least for me, I come at this from a little bit different perspective. I think that we actually need to expand it. I think we need to look a little bit of a larger perspective in terms of we need to make sure that we are creating not just the low-income affordable housing, yes, middle-class housing, frankly, working-class housing. There is a huge shortage of housing for people that are making 150 grand a year. I mean, it's really hard. You have to live way out, and that increases traffic. That increases transit time. It just creates a huge. It spreads us out. We start looking like Southern California as opposed to staying within the Growth Management Act. It puts pressure on the urban growth boundary. So to me, it's creating an opportunity for the Housing Trust Fund to be applicable in a variety of settings to create a more equitable, rebalance our housing overall.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Christiana.
Thank you. Again, this is really something that's front and center for communities like in Black Diamond because of the way that we're already growing exponentially. I will say that I have a lot of mixed feelings about REIT in general because what I've seen in our cities, in cities like ours, for example, is that this is often like the golden goose that's eventually going to die and stop laying the egg for how we're trying to make sure that we're building the actual infrastructure that our communities need. This is where, in a lot of ways, we can't really keep up with the growth in terms of their funding and resources. So, I'm cautiously in favor of REIT. But this is another example of our inherently inequitable tax system. And the fact that we are relying so much on pennies of property taxes or in the sale of homes is partly why we are in the crisis we are when it comes to how we can't fund our schools and when it comes to how we can't actually truly build affordable housing. So, I understand that shorter term solutions could include how we really look at property taxes and also REIT. But inherently, we need to find other funding models that really address the housing crisis so that we're not making people who are, already paying for homes that are above their means, like it would be if I were to move anywhere in the state today, that we're actually making sure that we're really walking the walk on equity. So that's a longer conversation than we can really do just for one housing bill alone. But ultimately, I would like to see us move away from these kinds of funding models and into more of the kind of revenue sources that really and truly do, to former Councilmember Ritchie's point, make the wealthy pay their fair share.
Great, thank you. So I'm putting a pin on a question I'm going to come back to. And that's getting specific on the revenue tools. But let's move on to the next question, which is question 6 here for the candidates. And this goes back a little bit to the discussion on NIMBYism, but maybe a little bit more focused on jurisdictional authority. And you all have that unique background, so we're curious to hear We know there's sometimes a tension between local and state housing priority or needs, or who makes the authority or decision. We know in the Puget Sound region that we need an abundance of new housing to support workers, to support immigrants and new families. However, there are jurisdictions that do continue in some instances to restrict housing in specific neighborhoods or lack the resources to address housing issues at scale. So the question for you is housing a state priority for you if you're elected, or is that something that you would like to leave to the local control? And we're gonna start this time with Christiana, go to Victoria, and then go to Jason.
Thank you. And I think, when I talk about things like NIMBYism and dog whistles, local control can sometimes be one of those. But when I talk about translating the words, what I mean when we talk about local control is that there are some cases where some cities need to make sure that it works for their unique concerns, right? Like, for example, the fact that we don't know where else we can build affordable housing. So how do we strategize and work with that? But ultimately, housing is a human right and it is a state priority. To me, it's about how do we make sure we're actually resourcing and equipping the city so that it becomes that funded mandate, as mentioned earlier. I grew up in the Kent East Hill. I worked at Kent Meridian High School, my first job out of college. And to me, it really breaks my heart to this day that the community I grew up in that claimed to welcome the world home is now having people live in tents outside of a broken down Econo Lodge. I go past there and I see the signs. We are failing the very communities that we claim to say that we care about. And that to me is unacceptable. So yes, the state is what's needed to step in because, for example, the cities of places like Kent could potentially very well, with their revenue base, be doing more to actually invest in the people that call the place home. Just like also though, in places like Black Diamond, the concern is we don't have transit, we don't have childcare, we don't have grocery stores. How can we have a walkable community to a grocery store if we aren't actually able to hold developers accountable to their agreements? This is a case where we have had to turn down one project simply because we were not sure that the developers would hold up their end of the bargain when it came to building the infrastructure before housing, because we're this tiny little chihuahua who's going to be barking at all these big companies and we don't have the resources to fight them. That's why it ultimately has to be a state issue. So, I'm really glad to hear on this call that we want to make sure we're listening to local communities. To me, I feel like a lot of ways we can shine a light on the bad parts of what local control is by making sure that we actually empower local jurisdictions to get on the same page in ways that are meaningful for them. That means investing more in, for example, the Department of Commerce to make sure that our communities can truly be set up for success. Because whether it's Black Diamond or it's Kent, we're set up for failure in this current day and age, and we can't do more of the same.
Thank you. Let's move on to Victoria.
I understand that there are tensions sometimes between the cities and the state government. I really don't think there needs to be, which is one of the reasons I am running. I think that especially my experience serving on the Issaquah City Council, Issaquah being a city of 40,000 people in the district, I think that, having those relationships, having worked on this issue from the side of the city, I know that there are some pain points, but I really think that they can be worked out. I think that the key to this is proactive collaboration with the cities, between the state legislature and the city leaders. The city leaders do know their local challenges very well. They know their communities, they know what their communities need. And I believe that having an open door policy, which I would absolutely have if I was a legislator, would help to make some of these policies move through the process faster. For example, the HB 1110, the Missing Middle Housing Bill, I am fully supportive. That bill took quite a while to work its way through the legislative process. And a lot of that was because at the initial phases, there was pushback from Association of Washington Cities and many individual cities because their specific concerns, they wanted to make sure that their specific concerns were addressed in the final bill. And so I think doing that work up front, working with community leaders, with elected leaders, would be something that I would really lead with to do this work. I'm endorsed by the mayors of Issaquah, Maple Valley, Snoqualmie, Sammamish, and North Bend, all cities within the district. And I would use those conversations to make sure that we are addressing concerns as early as possible, and that we are making sure that we are not having this tension between the local local needs and the state's actions to make sure that we have housing.
Thank you. Let's move on to Jason.
So definitely am, again, in agreement with my fellow candidates. I come to this from similar perspective. I don't have a city council that was willing to do this. My experience was that there was serious pushback from, there was boundary testing, right? They were like, let's see what the city's really, or the state is really gonna do. And then there was no bite behind that bark from the state. That's the thing that I saw. That was my experience. I don't know if that, you guys seen that too as candidates or people in the housing community, but I saw that the state doesn't do nearly enough in laying out specific, bright, sanction-oriented, literal bright lines. If this doesn't happen, then this punishment or sanction at a city level. City councils have a lot of leeway and they hear a lot of local folks, and there's a lot of folks, myself included, that kind of came into it with, wow, what did I get myself into? And you're listening to people, and there's a lot of conflicting points of view. What I missed and what I'd like to do, if I'm lucky enough to be elected to a state legislative role, that my goal would be to try to go back to the cities and listen and take the examples. What is it about your comp plan that's missing out that doesn't jive with what's going on at the state? Your development plans to create affordable housing, it doesn't connect with what we say we need at the state level. We need clarity at the state level. I absolutely think state level focus, state level direction is sorely needed, and that will correct the inactions or negative actions of cities. And to me, that's sorely needed. It's a huge problem. And I think that that's going to cause the development community to come in and say, we're going to develop. We don't get to just pick and choose then, because then we're all playing off the same playbook, right? They go to the cities that have the more, oh, we're just going to let them do what they want to do. We don't really need that housing here. We're going to deal with the state later. And then here comes the development community going in there and building their $1 million houses. That's wrong. We need a fair playing field for every city.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the top of the hour, and we're, of course, going to ask you for closing remarks. But I still have a hanging question before your closing remarks, just for 30 seconds on funding. The responses we got in your discussion here were a little bit more in response to the REIT, but I would like to hear what's your one idea of a revenue source that you would advance. 30 seconds for each candidate. And we're going to start with Victoria, go to Christiana, and Jason.
Well, I do support the direction that the bill that you advocated for was headed, and would support similar, more progressive within the realm of what's possible revenue bills. I also am supportive of capital gains tax, for example.
Excellent. Christiana?
So I also think that we need to both protect, as it's on the ballot right now, and expand capital gains. I'm also willing to have something implemented similar to the Seattle Jumpstart tax, and do that for our fastest earners, especially businesses. I also am willing to talk about a state income tax. I realize that's a really heavy lift. That's not short term, but we have some of the wealthiest earners in the state. And in a lot of ways, we really need to make sure that those top earners, like, for example, 400,000 and above a year, are paying into their fair share, because right now we're not cutting it with property taxes. And that's why we see schools closing even in the most affluent communities in our region. And that's due to a lot of the complexities of our funding model as tied for public education in particular. But we really need to make sure that, we're seeing Seattle and Bellevue schools closing. It's a funding issue, not a money issue. Our state has some money in the will. So that, and also there's a lot of other things that I would be happy to propose as well, but I realize it's only 30 seconds. But the point is, our tax system is the 49th in terms of in terms of tax equity. That is simply, again, unacceptable for a state with our kind of resources and money, that people are experiencing homelessness in the shadows of Fortune 500s. We should not be doing this.
Thank you. Let's go to Jason.
Agreed with some of the things that have been said. I'll be clear about where I'm at. I think that the state does have the resources. This is a political decision that, for one reason or not, the Democratic majority hasn't been able to do up to this point. So for me, it is about reallocating the resources that we have, and that does include taking money from the capital gains taxes that have been being brought in and making sure we're committing those to actual real life solutions for families in our cities and in our towns so that they have supportive housing. I think there's a lot of money going to the general fund, and then we just kind of splash it around. I think that we really need to focus on where we're spending our money. The cannabis tax, I mean, there's a bunch of it that's just going general fund. Why not take a bunch of that and put it towards supportive housing? Just a couple things right there that I think we really need to earmark things to make sure it's going to our priorities. If these are our priorities, we need to act like it.
Thank you. I'm going to just take a second and take a point of privilege as chair. I think the funding question is one that remains as important, and would encourage that candidates continue to think about what will be those revenue sources that can move forward, because we cannot scale the production of housing without scaled public investments in the production of housing and the preservation of housing, as well as in the operations of housing. So as you do this work and run and talk to your neighbors, encourage that you're thinking about revenue sources that we can continue to put forward in investing on this. And with that, I'm going to ask each of you to give us some closing remarks, and you have 60 seconds. I know we're a little bit over time, and we're going to go this time with Victoria being first, then we'll go to Christiana, we'll go to Jason, and that would be a wrap.
All right. Well, firstly, thank you so much for putting on this forum, and for all of you for taking time out of your evening to be here with us tonight. All of you are leaders in your community. And one thing I wanted to mention in my closing remarks is that this is a crowded race, and this will be a close race. There are the three of us running for the seat on this call, and there are two other candidates for the seat as well. So there's an upcoming ballot that you should get within the next couple of days, and we will all be on that primary ballot. I believe that housing is really important for not only achieving our housing needs for the community, but also for our climate needs, for protecting our environment, and for making sure that our communities are livable and welcoming. And I absolutely have that vision for the entire district. I am extremely honored to be supported by Representative Bill Ramos and have his sole endorsement, as well as Representative Lisa Callan. I would hit the ground running if I were elected to make sure that we are working on achieving housing that is for the entire community.
Thank you. Let's go on to Christiana.
Thank you. So again, I got into office in really some of the most trying of circumstances, and really starting off my terms of service during the COVID pandemic really laid bare the disparities that are already inherently embedded into our communities. Just like I already knew that our mental health crisis was at a boiling point in our schools long before COVID really laid that bare for all of us and exacerbated that too. I'm running to make sure that we have more voices from more parts of this legislative district, because the way that things are going, especially in the South End District, places like Black Diamond, and literally I'm building the bridges in Enumclaw right now too, to cross the bridge there. Our communities are different. Enumclaw was so excited that finally there's one bus line that's finally returning. But how can really we invest in the health and human services that are drastically needed to make sure that we are fully supporting all of our communities here? I'm here to be that voice. I'm endorsed by the Washington Education Association, the Bellevue Mayor, Lynn Robinson, among others, and I'd be really delighted to earn your support too. The last thing I'll say is I'm also here to champion community and therapeutic courts, because we also know that the overhauling the justice system is a really major part to how we can make sure that we're also righting the wrongs of the past that have exacerbated our housing inequities.
Thank you. Let's go on to Jason, the closer.
Closer, yikes. Apologies for being late again, guys. Grateful for the opportunity. My quickie spiel is that the thing I'm bringing to the table is being a consensus builder. I come from a divided council, a divided community where we're trying to work together to find those issues that bring us together. I'm here to solve problems. It's what I do every day in human resources, every day for my job. I look at this as we have an affordability crisis in our state, specifically in housing affordability. This is the most important issue in the election. We need more affordable transit-oriented housing across our state, specifically within the urban core and in the 5th legislative district. As I mentioned, I'm a renter. I'd love the opportunity to be able to afford to buy a home for my family. This is creating affordable housing, creating opportunities for new ownership, building up, not out. These are the things that I'm speaking to people about on the doors. My mail pieces have gone out, a couple of them already. These are the issues on my mail pieces. I'm here to talk about housing. This is a critical, if not to me, it's the one issue that I'm speaking about the most on the doors. Focus on creating incentives for developers, incentives for cities to work towards creating affordable housing near transit centers. I'll just close by saying I've been endorsed by the Seattle Times and Senator Mark Mullet and many others and labor unions as well, and grateful for the opportunity to learn more about this group, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you all for participating in this candidate forum and for being willing to run. We know it takes a lot of commitment to do so and to be in public service. As I opened with some remarks here, we all know that housing is a human right and truly the cornerstone for a thriving community. And we currently know that that is out of reach for far too many people in our community. And it therefore means we must double down on solutions that we know work. We know we must increase public investments to support the production and preservation of housing. Increasingly now, we must invest in the operations of supporting housing. We must also stabilize renters in their communities while we're also working towards expanding the supply of homes. And in running for office, you are raising your hand to do all of this work with all of us, and we're grateful. And with that, I want to thank the participants who joined us for this discussion, and looking forward to getting more homes and making them a reality for all. Thank you.